We're looking here at the nervous system. This is going to be paired with your endocrine system as part of your quiz. The nervous system's job is to coordinate activities within your body to help maintain homeostasis. Remember, going back, this is review homeostasis, maintaining stable internal conditions even when the outside environment is going through changes. The nervous system is very complex. We as humans are currently pretty limited in our understanding and ability to treat and manipulate the nervous system. Brain, spinal cord injuries, concussion, traumatic brain injuries, etc. are very difficult for us to understand, treat medically, diagnose, etc. And that's because of how complex this system is. The nervous system is going to work closely with the endocrine system. The endocrine is in your next video. That controls the body with long, slow chemical impulses, things that we generally call hormones, whereas the nervous system controls the body with short, fast electrical impulses, which is different than the endocrine system. Your endocrine system can make you tired or hungry or control your puberty. Your nervous system is going to help you to run and jump and use your senses. And so they're pretty different in the speed and the mechanism by which they function. The nervous system is divided into two main functional areas, or two parts. What's called the central nervous system. That's basically your brain and spinal cord. Your brain is the location of intelligence, memory, emotion, thought, logic, etc., whereas your spinal cord integrates and coordinates sensory data, so think movement, position, being out of balance, and motor control. So that's division number one, central nervous system, often shortened CNS, and then number two is your peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This is all the nervous tissue outside of your brain and spinal cord. So there's about 10 million nerves in the body, and these are actually the nerves that are responsible for controlling the function of your muscles, your glands. So they're running out from your central nervous system out to the extremities in your body to control all the other processes. When we look at the peripheral nervous system, we tend to divide it into two further categories. These aren't usually on the Regents exam, but there are some things that we have what we call somatic nervous system, things that we have voluntary, you can think voluntary control. These are like your skeletal muscle nerves. This is, you can think to run, move your hand, write, etc. Although at your age, you tend not to think about forming the actual shape of a letter, right? How many of you do that on a daily basis? Not that many of you. And then we have our autonomic nervous system, which is the involuntary stuff. And that's really targeted a lot at smooth muscle. So we talked about the pacemaker cells in your heart, how we can't control the beating of our heart by thought, so that's under autonomic control. Your digestive system, most of you are not currently thinking about having your breakfast be digested within your stomach. Some of our glandular tissues, etc., all under what are called autonomic control. So these are nerves that we can't voluntarily control, not because they're not linked to our brain, but we just don't have voluntary thought control over them. So these really are in charge of two different things when we look at the different levels, central versus peripheral. First, central is really targeted at information processing. So you take information in and you send a response out. Peripheral, first of all, is where the senses are occurring, and then it's where the commands travel through. Okay, so senses occur and then commands travel through the peripheral nervous system. Central is where it's processed. So all the information processing is happening within the brain or the spinal cord. And so this chart just really takes us from receptors to effectors. Receptors are inputs coming in, and effectors are inputs going out. So this could be you're sensing something, travels through your peripheral nervous system, gets processed in the central nervous system, and then a change is dictated out. Now, something like you trip and you catch yourself before you fall, that's going to be voluntary, somatic, and it's going to be affecting skeletal muscle. Something very different, like you eat and saliva is excreted in your mouth, that's going to be under autonomic control, and that's coming from saliva, would be from your glands. So food comes in your mouth, right, goes up, it's processed, and then it comes back down and has an effect on your salivary glands. The way that the nervous system works is through a series of electrical signals, so electrical impulses that travel through our nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is typically referred to an individual nerve cell as a neuron. That's a cell that can both send and receive signals. And neurons have two main, or really three main cell parts or cell regions. They have what are called dendrites. These are structures that receive nerve pulses in. They have the cell body, that's where the nucleus is going to be, most of the organelles to process sugars and build proteins and all that sort of thing. And then they have axons, and these send the nerve pulses along to the next neuron in line. This is just a look at a representation of nerve cell then. Here's the dendrites, all these things in that region. Remember, dendrites take nerve impulses in. The cell body, this is where the organelles are going to be found. And then the axon has the impulses travel out. Okay, so in, here comes the sense, think of smell, comes in the dendrite, and then it travels along the axon to the next cell. Well, it's either passing, usually passing the information along up to your central nervous system. And so how your nervous system works is it will link together a series of nerves. So you've got the axon of one nerve will end at the dendrites of another nerve cell, right? And they can relay the messages from cell to cell. And so our brain has lots of connections between cells, and they use little chemicals to jump the gap between one nerve cell and the next. One of the most important aspects of your nervous system are these little tubes of fat that get wrapped around your axons. These little tubes are made of a substance called myelin, and what they do is they speed up the signal as it travels down the axon. So myelin equals faster. The presence of these myelin tubes wrapped around the axon allows nerve signals to transmit more quickly. This is created, myelin is formed as an infant in the womb and for the first couple of months after delivery, the first early part of your life, which makes diet and nutrition very important for our children, as it can have actual physical effects on the buildup of myelin, which can actually affect the speed of nerve signal pathways that can have physical and mental effects moving forward. When we look at how these impulses or nerve signals move, we tend to think of them as electrical. They're actually created by chemistry, but it creates an electrical impulse so that a signal travels down the length of a nerve cell from the dendrite down to the axon. Now, once the impulse reaches the end of the axon, it has to jump to the next cell. And our bodies use a little chemical to make that transfer between the cells. Those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. You often see depictions of neurotransmitters on chemicals for different types of drugs like antidepressants. One common neurotransmitter you might have heard of is dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter associated with all kinds of different emotions. So the chemical signal is basically released into the space between the two nerve cells. So if this is the axon of one cell, okay, and then you've got a dendrite of another cell here, the neurotransmitter travels between the axon and the dendrite. That space, that gap, is called a synapse, a nerve synapse, the open space that cells pass through. And so the cell is using electricity to travel down the cell body, then diffusion across the synapse, and then it will create another electrical impulse as it travels down the length of the next nerve cell or neuron. Now this can create a variety of responses. It gets really complicated if you start thinking about performing physical activities like catching a ball. There is a delay in your nervous system that's quite substantial when you start to think about how fast maybe a baseball is being thrown at you. So your body really has to take some things into account and create your actions ahead of time. It's very predictive, and we're not really aware of that. That's why little kids appear clumsy. Their nervous systems haven't really accounted for that time lapse yet. But we all do have a set of impulses that are automatic, and those tend to be called reflexes. And these are nerve signals that are going to be faster than voluntary things. And they basically do that by bypassing the brain. So there's no brain involvement in a reflex. And you've all had at least a knee reflex taken at the doctor. And that basically is information comes in, it goes to the spinal cord, and then change is immediately sent back out. There's no link to the brain, and most of these are thought to happen to speed the reaction. A lot of them associated with injury. So one common example of this is if something's flying at your eye, right? You're going to blink. That is a reflex. You're not under voluntary control. That's happening very quickly, and that's to protect you from damage. When we look at disorders of the nervous system, one that can be caused through traumatic injury, among a couple of other things, is paralysis. And paralysis occurs usually when you have some sort of spinal cord damage, right? So remember, information is processed up in the brain, and then commands are sent out. And so if you have spinal cord damage, like here, let's say you broke your back and damaged the spinal cord, commands could come out but not be able to reach your legs, for instance, because of a break in the nervous tissue. The neurons are no longer connected to the brain. And paralysis can be variable. You can be paralyzed anywhere along the length of the spine, and the area affected would be different depending on that. You can also have partial paralysis of the limb or nerve damage just in one specific body region that would result in partial loss of control but not full. Some common diseases then of the endocrine system to discuss. I'm going to start with meningitis. Meningitis is a inflammation of the brain and spinal cord meninges. If you look here, the meninges is a tissue layer that sits basically like between the brain and the skull. And there's a zoom in here. And so when the meninges becomes infected, it can swell and put a lot of pressure on the brain. Meningitis can have a variety of causes, the most common of which is probably bacterial. It's also maybe the scariest or the most difficult to treat. It can actually cause permanent brain damage and death. Below are some symptoms of meningitis: fever, stiff neck, headache, vomiting, sensitivity to light, drowsiness or confusion. Meningitis is common on some college campuses. Many schools require a vaccine to prevent meningitis, but it's a very serious illness where somehow usually bacteria gets up here in the meninges and causes infection and tissue damage. Alzheimer's, some of you might know of somebody with Alzheimer's. This is a progressive, that means it gets worse over time. Cortical atrophy, so atrophy is like a breakdown in tissue, especially the frontal lobes. That's the front part of the brain that's involved with a lot of thought, memory, reasoning, things like that. It's very common, I shouldn't say very common, but it's mostly found in people in the later years, age 70 or older. We don't really know a great cause or mechanism for Alzheimer's, you can visibly see a difference in the brain structure. That tissue's very much damaged. But there's links known to heredity, autoimmune disease, which is your immune system attacks your own body, toxins, and viruses. Some symptoms of meningitis are shown in this diagram, include memory loss, trouble repeating even familiar tasks, so tasks that would normally be habitual, difficulty doing that, confusion with respect to time and location where you're at, changes in personality, so people maybe that used to be much happier becoming different in their outlook, trouble solving problems, not just math problems, but simple step-by-step problems, images and spaces, difficulty remembering words, names, places, faces, and this is usually a very sad disease that's progressive. It gets worse through time. The last disease I'm going to talk about is, you might have heard of as MS, which is short for multiple sclerosis. This is a disease of inflammation and tissue damage of the nerve cells. This word demyelinization, we haven't talked about it a ton, but your nerve cells are wrapped in this chemical called myelin, which is a type of fat, and that makes the nerve impulses go or travel more quickly. Demyelinization then is a breakdown of that layer, which slows nervous system impulses. You can see, and it's characteristic of MS to actually have brain lesions and spinal cord lesions that can be visualized with an MRI or CAT scan. And there is usually, symptoms include a loss of coordination, muscle weakness, numbness, unsteady gait, vertigo, difficulty speaking, troubles with digestive symptoms, etc. MS can be treated with medicine. It can be managed, not cured.